Welcome back to the podcast History of Our World. Chapter 50, The Vedic Age. In the early 1920s, a former chicken farmer named Heinrich Himmler became enthralled with stories about ancient India, specifically of the authors of the great holy text, the Rig Veda, a group of invaders called the Aryans. These chariot-riding warriors captivated Himmler's imagination. They were tall and bearded and noticeably light-skinned. They conquered India, driving out their enemies, imposing order on the primitives there, and then moved west, through Iran, land of the Aryans, into Europe and ending up in Germany. These mighty warriors were the true ancestors of the German Herrenvolk, the master race. And this is what Himmler and his boss, Adolf Hitler, believed to be true. Where to begin? Well, nobody knows what the Aryans looked like. To the Nordicists, the Aryans clearly must have been blonde and blue-eyed, but Italian fascists disagreed, saying that the Romans were Aryan and that the Italians, at least the northern ones, still shared that bloodline. Not my ancestors, though. Sicilians had lost too much of their Aryan heritage to other races. So what percentage makes it okay? And what about other Europeans like the Baltic states who were invaded by Teutonic warriors? Or what about those from Central Asia? Or the plain fact that most people thought and still think the whole thing was ridiculously stupid to begin with, and, well, it begs the question. Just what the heck is an Aryan anyway? In the last episode, we left off with the introduction of these Aryans into India. Possibly. Between 1575 and 1500, it's traditionally held that nomads crossed into northwest India through the Hindu Kush mountains. Once there, they made their way through the different passes and settled down in the upper branches of the Indus River in what is now the Punjab region. This new homeland was called Sapta Sindhu, the land of the seven rivers. Interestingly, the word Punjab is of Persian origin and means 5 rivers, which means either someone's bad at math or things have changed a bit on the earth. Actually, one of the rivers has dried up and the other one sort of disappeared. These nomads, as nomads typically do things, didn't know much about civilization and the niceties of staying in one place for a while. They had no words for anything farming related, implying a herding culture, and even hung around the abandoned Harappan buildings for a while. Actually, they might have stayed in this region for almost a century before pushing further into India, keeping in mind that we're still assuming these people migrated to India and aren't native. The jury's still out on this one. Which also leads us to the question of what to call them. Everything's got to have a label, right? Why not just call them Aryans and be done with it? See, the only record we have of a name comes from their descendants, who used a term called Arya to describe them. And this little 4-letter word is loaded with controversy. In Sanskrit, the language of these people, Arya translates to something like respectable or noble. But it can also mean pure, something the Nazi wackadoos focused on. But they got it all wrong. Way wrong. First off, let's just get it out there. We don't know what these people were called. There's no tablet or inscription left behind saying Grok the Aryan was here. So there's that. And they never left any notes claiming they took over the region either. But let's assume these Arya did show up in India from parts unknown. Again, there's almost zero evidence to indicate the Indus Valley civilizations were conquered, but the IVC people had to have persisted on. It just doesn't make any sense for a civilization to disappear, especially one with such an ingrained infrastructure. The introduction of these new Arya people into the region no doubt brought about some mingling, and the elites of both societies probably buddied up, as did the warriors, and then the farmers showed the nomads their tricks, and agricultural terms like plow started entering the language, and, well, here we are. Not a very good origin story, but the history is vague and murky. Now we enter the period of Indian history referred to as the Vedic Age, a period of time roughly between 1500 and 500 BC. What's the Vedic part refer to? Why, the massive collection of lore and religion that are the Vedas, the earliest Hindu texts. Supposedly revealed by Brahma, god of creation, and written in the language of the Arya, Sanskrit. Of course, Brahma isn't a Vedic god, but let's not get hung up on the details. Now, before we delve into this, it bears mentioning that Sanskrit received a huge boost in global recognition during the 18th and 19th centuries, when scholars in the West noticed there was an interesting resemblance between ancient Sanskrit words and many European languages. One of these linguists, a Sir William Jones in particular, wrote, "The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either, yet bearing to both of them a stronger affinity than could possibly have been produced by accident. So strong indeed that no philologer could examine them all three without believing them to have sprung from a common source, which perhaps no longer exists." For example, take the English word father. Sounds pretty similar to its German cousin, Vater. Now the Sanskrit word for father is pitar. Father, pitar. Some resemblance, right? But what about the Latin pater? And Greek pateras? Spanish it's padre, and French it's père. They're pretty neat, right? What, you're not convinced? Alright, well, what about numbers? 1, 2, 3, uno, due, tre in Italian, et, dvoa, tria in Swedish, and in Sanskrit it's eka, duo, treia. Or what about the fire god Agni and the Latin word ignis, from which we get ignite? My pronunciations might be poor, but you get the idea. Anyway, it is true that there was some Proto-Indo-European ancestor language somewhere lost to time, which is really cool when you consider that completely different cultures, say Norse Vikings and modern Persian speakers, both come from the same language family. Cool stuff. As for the Vedic Aryans and their language, it takes a while before Sanskrit is put to paper. The Rig Veda, the earliest collection of Indian hymns, composed in poetic fashion, wouldn't be written down until 600 BC, despite it being composed orally probably between 1400 and 1100. While there's no concrete history here, these books do offer a glimpse into the Vedic world, explaining their gods, detailing various prayers, and giving hints at their lifestyle. The book is organized into 10 cycles called mandalas and discuss the wide pantheon of Vedic gods. Amongst them are Varuna, a sky god, Mitra, god of the sun and oaths, Agni, who we just mentioned, and Indra, leader of the gods and god of war. He's mentioned quite a bit, and it's no surprise. The Arya of the Rig Veda describe themselves as proud fighters, deeply devoted to their chief god, honoring him best by conquering lands on their prized horse-drawn chariots, wielding great axes. They sometimes go after a people called the Pani, known for being miserly and refusing to honor the gods. Either that or they're demons. There's some disagreement here. But perhaps the greatest enemy of the Arya were the Dasa. Whereas the Arya are referred to as a shining, bright, noble people, the Dasa are depicted as brutish, foul-speaking, savage, and black-skinned. Something that the early proponents of modern Aryanism seized upon with all the implicit racial overtones it suggests. Take this quote from the Rig Veda. "For fear of thee, forth fled the dark-hued races, scattered abroad, deserting their possessions, when glowing, O Vaishvanara, for Puru did Agni didst light and rend their castles." Incidentally, the whole torching castles thing was used by early Harappan historians as proof the Vedic Aryans conquered the Indus Valley. But once people actually realized there's no burn marks anywhere, yeah. I wonder what else they got wrong. But it did say dark-hued races. What else could this line mean? One more verse from the Rig Veda. "Active and bright have they come forth, impetuous in speed like bulls, driving the black skin far away, quelling the rightless Dasa. May we think upon the bridge of bliss, leaving the bridge of woe behind." I mean, it's things like this that gave certain nutjobs more ammunition behind their own weird Aryan theories, but what these people fail to understand is what's lost in translation. Sanskrit is a deeply metaphorical language, and the Vedas aren't non-fiction texts, but poems, hymns, allegories, metaphors. Basically what I'm saying, black skin may not literally mean black skin, but rather the way you describe someone evil as black-hearted. It could be that the Dasa aren't actually people at all, but another make-believe demonic race the Arya proudly fight against. For all we know, they're as fictional as the Amazons, but then again, plenty of people still think they existed, so whatever. Enough with the racial theories, but before we leave the religious world, there's one more thing to mention. Because the Vedic Arya loved to emulate Indra so much, they also followed one more trait of his: the love of Soma. What's Soma? Pretty much a mind-altering drug that gave the gods their immortality and made warriors braver, put words into the mouths of poets, and allowed priests to divine the mysteries of the universe. It was a powerful psychoactive drink made from the crushed stems of a plant and then mixed with other ingredients like honey and milk. It was so beloved that the entire 9th mandala of the Rig Veda is all about the stuff. 114 hymns of things like, O Soma, flowing on thy way, win thou and conquer high renown, and make us better than we are. Win thou the light, win heavenly light, and Soma, all felicities, and make us better than we are. Groovy! Except no one knows what plant Soma came from. The first guess is cannabis, but come on. That's the same thing Herodotus said about Cyrus the Great's enemies, the Masagatai, how they smoked cannabis before battle. Makes zero sense to anyone who knows what I'm talking about. And besides, Soma sounds more like a stimulant than anything else. And so the closest contender right now to the identity of the Soma plant is ephedra. The plant's active chemical, ephedrine, is in the same family as amphetamines, which would explain the stimulant properties of Soma. But before any of you start thinking about your own episode of Breaking Soma, keep in mind ephedrine can be dangerous, with a wide range of some pretty nasty side effects. If you need some energy, go drink some coffee, and leave this stuff to the gods. Now before you think it's just about fighting and getting high with the Arya, there's more stuff they love. And one in particular still carries true today in India: cows. Cattle culture is all over the world, but think of the Maasai, for example, and same with the Arya. And what's not to love about our bovine friends? A cow is a never-ending source of wealth, alive or dead. When it's happily up and mooing, you can get milk, and therefore butter and cheese, you can burn its dung for fuel, and can even use its urine for medicine. If you're into that. And if old Bessie dies, well, you got yourself a new leather coat and plenty of steak. Truly an amazing animal, and the Arya knew it. They had a passion for cows, and more cows. In fact, they were so crazy for cows that the Sanskrit word to make war, gavishti, literally means to desire more cows. There's even some evidence that suggests cows were not to be killed. But then again, there's no indication that these people didn't abstain from the occasional hamburger either. They also loved the horse, introducing it to the region, and a favored method of conquest for an Aryan warlord was to turn their favorite horse loose to roam the countryside. For an entire year, everywhere the horse went, they followed, and conquered all in its path. And then once that year was up, they sacrificed the horse for good measure. Huzzah! But lest you think the Vedic Arya are just perpetually looking for a fight, there's an organized society here with cities and ruling groups. Maybe the best way to think of them are as dynastic families. Think Game of Thrones style. Clans, sort of. The chief is referred to as a Raja, essentially a king, but not in the absolute monarch sense. The real governing was done by two councils who advised the Raja and appointed a new one too. The Raja was seen as a war leader, there to protect the people from those who would do them evil, and not the supreme authority. That was reserved for the priests. And that reversal of power from the mighty to the holy changes Indian society over time, and one's family lineage becomes more important than one's accomplishments. I'm moving really fast through the history myths here to say at some point society became stratified and separated into the Varnas, known more commonly as the caste system. At the top, no surprise, were the priests, the Brahmin. Next were the warriors, the Kshatriya, which I totally mispronounced 2 episodes ago, and probably am mispronouncing it now. Third were the Vaishya, the merchants, and last were the Sudra, the laborers and workers. Now there's a 5th class of people which used to be called Dalits, or untouchables, until Gandhi renamed them Harijan, children of God. These are the people who did the absolute worst jobs, like handling waste and working in tanneries, although there's debate if this class existed at this point. We'll get into the religious reasons behind this system more in the next episode, because the caste system really can't exist without Hinduism. And speaking of Hinduism, as the Arya mingled and spread further east into India, they encountered more and more native gods. Gods with animal features, gods with multiple heads, even a lowborn god with totally black skin. Oh, that whole thing with the dasa is gonna be difficult to explain, right? But there's no record of any religious clashing, no insistence on the authority of the Vedas. The worship of the older gods just sort of blended into the new gods, which is also the best I can offer to the origins of Hinduism. It just sort of happened. One last thing concerning that black-skinned god, Krishna, whose name in Sanskrit literally means black, by the way. I know he's shown in blue in most modern depictions, but I haven't quite figured out why. Anyway, one of the most famous stories about him comes from the massive Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, the tale of a great struggle over who gets to be king. Like the Iliad, it's one of those possibly historical works that can never really be proven true. And for this story, it's either thought to take place in 3102 BC, the same day as the flood from the last episode, or sometime during the 15th century. Well, you know an epic is really good when a single part of it is so good, it gets its own book. The Bhagavad Gita is a discussion that takes place between Prince Arjuna of the Pandavas and Krishna, acting as the prince's charioteer and all-around advisor. The Pandavas have lost their kingdom to the Kauravas, their cousins, and have made ready for war. With me so far? Okay. Basically, as Arjuna pulls up to the battlefield and surveys the land, he thinks about the consequences of his actions. On the other side were relatives, friends, teachers. How could he spill the blood of his own family? It seems so evil. And so he throws down his bow and arrows and refuses to fight. Krishna, meanwhile, explains that it's Arjuna's duty to fight, because the universe has certain laws and codes of conduct that must be followed. To disobey is to perpetuate the cycle of karma, the concept that the soul continues on after we die, and takes a new body depending on how one behaved in the previous life. It's not necessarily about good and evil, but rather how well one adheres to this system. For example, Arjuna, if you're a warrior prince and you don't want to fight, well, that's like a lion that doesn't eat meat, or a rabbit that eats people, or the son of a king whose castle was built 4 times in a swamp and all the ingrate wants to do is sing and not marry a girl with huge tracts of land. It's not natural. This world, Krishna explains, is an illusion. You want to free yourself from it? Follow the karmic order. But Arjuna, still not convinced, asks Krishna, what is real then? And Krishna tells him, or rather shows him. Just like that, Krishna transforms into his universal form, a cosmic being of infinite and unfathomable power, countless heads and arms facing and reaching everywhere in the galaxy, and he speaks. I am the father of this universe, and even the source of the father. I am the mother of this universe, and the creator of all. I am the high to be known, the path of purification. I am the way, and the master who watches in silence, thy friend, thy shelter, and thy abode of peace. The heat of the sun comes from me, and I send and withhold the rain. I am life immortal and death. I am what is, and I am what is not. And then he returns to his mortal form and says to a completely messed up Arjuna, now quit your belly aching and do your job. And he does. The end. Except it's not the end, because anyone listening would have picked up on the message here. It's not about right or wrong. It's about doing one's duty without questioning one's actions. Which you can see why Himmler carried a copy of the Gita in his coat pocket. Yeah, well, this cycle of karma and duty and social order played real well throughout the Vedic Age. But next time, after we explain more about this, of course, we'll take a look at the lives of 2 individuals who didn't quite agree with this view of things. Surely there has to be more to life than just blindly accepting one's fate, right? Isn't there anything you can do to escape this never-ending cycle of suffering? Yeah, but you'll have to wait for the next episode. Only on the podcast History of Our World.